So today is the day that I blew up the Yamaha's motor. So now we're going to try to figure out what it's going to take to fix it, and then we're going to fix it. Right, Peppy? Right, Peppy? Gonna fix the bike? Yes. Hello. So we'll get to it. While I get this bike turned around, I'll tell you what was going on. So we're at the track today, and was hunting somebody down, passed him, got ahead of him, was going on to the next guy, and came into this first turn, and bike stalled, which usually, you know, it's happened before where I'm just in a wrong gear, and I stalled it, and I was like, oh, whatever. So I go to kick it over again, and my Kickstarter is totally jammed up, which is a telltale sign that you may have seized the motor, meaning that the piston is just fused to the cylinder wall, you know, could have smashed up into the head with the valves. There's a whole bunch of really nasty, scary things that could have happened. So I don't know exactly what's going on. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull the oil filter right now and just look inside and see if we can find any kind of metal bits or flakes or anything like that. And that'll kind of steer us in the right direction about how scared we should be. So I'm going to tip the bike over on its left-hand side and open up the oil filter cover and just pull that out and see what's in there. And then we'll go ahead and drain all the oil after that. So we pulled out the oil filter, and you got a little bit of metal, but not like crazy. Well, I've got the bike over on its side. I'm going to take this little plastic skid plate off, and we're going to flush the oil out of it and see if, I can't remember if I have a magnetic drain plug on this. If I do, we'll look at that and see if we have any shavings there. But there was nothing particularly alarming in the oil filter. But shavings might not have made their way through the whole oil circulation system because we killed the bike right away. So we'll find out, we'll see. So I've totally drained the oil out of this motor. No flakes of any kind in the oil, and I didn't end up having a magnetic drain plug on there, but there was nothing in there. No flakes, nothing looked catastrophic. So I'm going to get it up on the jack so it's easier to work with. I'm going to try putting it in gear on spinning the rear wheel and see if it's freed up, if it'll have any kind of movement. So we'll try that next. I'm going to finish getting this locked in place, and then we'll give that a go. All right, the bike is all safely strapped into the tusk stand. We're going to pop this into gear. Go up to 6th gear. Not promising. Usually up in top gear you can spin the rear wheel and you can hear the piston moving up and down through its stroke, but not the case here. So let's start stripping off some of these body panels so we can dive in here and see what we find. So we don't want the cam chain to fall down into the bottom end of the motor, so we'll take some mechanics wire and just tie that like that. I'll take the other end and wrap it around the So again, first glimpse at the head. Nothing crazy going on up here. Looking down underneath. Valves are all intact, so nothing came in contact with the face of the piston. Some carbon buildup, but again, nothing crazy. All right, a little recap. So we got the valve cover off, we got the cams out, we've got the head off. So now we're going to undo this bolt and wiggle the cylinder free from the piston. I was able to push the piston down, so we know it's not welded to the cylinder wall. So let's go ahead and see what else we can find. We got our cylinder off here. So we've got the cylinder off. It's separated from the piston just fine. There's no weird wear on the piston rings, but we're gonna, again, pull the piston off the connecting rod and really look nice and close to see if we've got any kind of abnormal wear on those rings. But I'm not seeing any like blow by or anything like that. I don't know what caused this to lock up. So the wrist pin here is what holds the piston to the connecting rod. So going through everything, I'm not seeing anything that's jumping out as particularly worn or out of spec. We didn't have any play in the piston where it connects to the connecting rod with the wrist pin. None of the rings on the piston are worn. You get a little bit of natural wear on the little skirts here on the piston. You get the normal carbon deposits on the head of the piston. But you can see the carbon. And then same thing goes for the cylinder. I can still see the crosshatch pattern in the wall of the cylinder. Again, you've got a little bit of wear that corresponds with the skirt of the piston, but nothing that is particularly alarming. I could have gotten away with just a new piston and honing the cylinder, but in the interest of time, I'm just going ahead and buying a whole kit that's piston, cylinder, all the gaskets needed to rebuild this top end. So today I'm going to clean everything up, and we're going to dive into the valve train here on the head and just make sure we've got nothing in there that's bent or otherwise compromised. Valve bucket, shim. So now we need a valve spring compression tool, which is what we have right here, and we'll use this to compress the valve springs, which will allow us to take those collets out, which will allow us to take that top pad out, which will allow us to pull the spring out, and then the valve. As you're doing this, you want to make sure that you're centered in the valve here, and you're centered on the valve top hat here. Got your valve spring, top hat, and the valve slides down through the valve guide. And there you go. You got one of your intake valves done. So now we're going to measure the free length of these springs. The intake are 40.76 millimeter. That's where you want it to be. The limit is 39.76. And for the exhaust, it's 37.1 millimeter to 36.1 millimeter. You want to be as close to that as possible. So let's measure that. 40.44. And where did we say that was? So we are dead center of that range. So this spring is good. 36.43. That's still good. Next, we're going to check the spring tilt. You're going to take your spring, hold it up against a 90-degree angle, and you're going to measure the gap that comes in right there at the widest point. You're going to measure that in degrees, or you can translate that to millimeters. So for an intake valve on this bike, you don't want that gap to be more than 1.8 millimeters. So I've got a 1.8 millimeter gap right there. Let's see if we have a white background. This isn't the most accurate way to do it, but you can see that that is within spec. So that valve tilt is good. We'll do that for the rest of them. A measurement I can't do is check the run out of the valves. So in order to do that, you would have a cradle. You would set the valve in the cradle and basically hold it like this. And you would take a dial gauge that would measure right here to make sure that the valve was in fact straight and true. And there's an allowance for how bent or the curvature of this. And you'd be able to pick that up based on how it would contact the dial gauge. I don't have a clamp-on dial gauge or a little cradle to spin this in, so we are just going to look at it and clean it up and reuse it. So we visually inspected the components of the valve train, the springs, the top hats, collets, valves, buckets, everything we could pull out of the head. We've looked at, inspected, measured what we could, and so far everything looks really good. We're going to reuse everything here. We're going to clean up the head itself, and then we'll look down through the valve guides and just make sure that there's no abnormalities in there, and we'll just kind of get it all cleaned up. So here I'm trying to clean up some of the carbon deposits on the exhaust valves and the port coming out here. And I'm trying to be careful not to disrupt or otherwise mar the valve seat or the valve guide in there. So I'm just being very gentle, compressed air, a little bit of carb cleaner, just trying to break down some of this carbon deposit so I can clean it out and freshen this up a little bit. So I figured out what was wrong with this motor. The clearance between the connecting rod and the crankshaft for 3/4 of a revolution is fine. For that last quarter, it actually binds up. So that's where our engine binding up is coming from. So for some reason, there was an increase in temperature which caused something to expand enough to throw the connecting rod out of spec. So I ordered a new crankshaft and connecting rod assembly, which means we got to go into the bottom end of this motor, which means we got to pull it from the frame and pull it all apart. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to take the entire motor apart.